Indiana Jones, Dr. Mooring. Yeah, so we're here at Cabrillo National Monument, and this is the Ocean View parking lot. Basically, as you come in, you pass the welcome box, or whatever they call it, the entrance box. You show this vehicle fee waiver, so you don't have to pay an entry, and then you come the first parking lot on the right. It says Ocean View. Just park here, and we're just going to go up this trail right here, okay? And that's going to take you to the Bayside Trail. Okay, let's go. Okay, so I've just walked up from the parking lot, and we're going to cross the road right here. The visitor center is down there, and we're going to cross the road and turn right. We're not going to go to the lighthouse, but we're going to carry on to the left down a kind of an asphalt road, and there'll probably be a sign there that says that it goes to the Bayside Trail. So just follow me. Come on. Okay, so you can see the lighthouse. The point level lighthouse is right there, and we've got this sign that says the Bayside Trail. It's once you get down there, there's an access road, and once you get down there, it's less than 2 miles round trip, so it's not very far. If you look around here, there's some Torrey pines. These Torrey pines are native to Southern California, but they're not native to this area, Cabrillo National Monument, but they're here anyway. But once we get on the trail, everything is native. Basically, they've cut down everything that's non-native. So yeah, so just follow this road here, and it's going to take you to the trail. Okay, so we're on the access road, and as you can see, there's a beautiful view of the bay, North Island over there, the naval airstrip. The statue of Juan Cabrillo is up there, the visitor center. So this is basically the same kind of view, at least locally, that Juan Cabrillo would have had when he landed here in 1542. It really hasn't been changed. They've tried to maintain this as native, as natural as possible. Here we have a lemonade berry. We'll talk more about this. Covered with a wild cucumber. So we'll talk about these plants as we go along. The key thing here is that this is a coastal sage scrub. It's usually by the coast, lower elevation. It's a habitat that's found in a Mediterranean climate. Mediterranean climate has cool, wet winters, and it has hot, dry summers. And the key thing about the coastal sage scrub is that it's drought deciduous. Drought deciduous means that the plants here are really adapted to getting most of their moisture in the cool winter time, and then basically they become dormant, many of them, throughout the rest of the year, throughout the hot, dry summer. And one of the ways they become dormant is by becoming deciduous. And so you'll see some of these plants actually drop their leaves and they look like they're dead. It looks like a bunch of dead, dried out sticks. But that's not the case. They're actually deciduous. They've dropped their leaves so that they don't have to maintain the metabolic cost of those leaves during the hot, dry summer. A great example is right here. So if you take a look at this, it doesn't look like much. In fact, it looks like it's dead. In fact, you might be saying, well, they should clear this stuff out. They should get rid of it. They should burn it or something. It looks ugly. But the fact is that this is a living plant. It's just drought deciduous. It's dropped its leaves because it hasn't gotten very much moisture lately. This is actually California Encelia, and we'll look at these further on. You can see that some of these plants have got these nice kind of long oval green leaves, and so it just depends on what patch you're looking at. So a lot of them have dropped their leaves. We'll hopefully, here we go, right here. We've got this one composite flower, this yellow composite flower. Yellow petals and a kind of a brown central disc, and then these you can kind of zoom in here depending on how much water they have available. You've got these nice oval green leaves. So this is Encelia. This is a very common plant that's found out here. Of course, the native Indians used this quite a bit. The Spanish used it quite a bit. But as you can see, it is a great example of being drought deciduous because it drops its leaves and then it doesn't basically sprout out and green up its leaves until the rains come. So comparison with that patch of Encelia that we just saw, the California Encelia that was all dried out with the bare branches, here is a nice patch that's apparently locally getting a lot of moisture, because you can see there's lots of leaves, there are big leaves, there's lots of flowers, these yellow composite flowers, and so the local micro habitat conditions are very moist, and so it's sprouting up all over the place. Whereas just a little bit up the road it was all dried out and all the leaves had dropped. So this is the kind of difference you can see just on a microhabitat basis with California Encelia. Okay, so here we are at the trailhead. We've walked down this asphalt service road, and you can see the sign says the Bayside Trail. It's 1.6 miles round trip, so it's not too strenuous. And you can see that it heads downhill, and you'll be going downhill, kind of swerving back and forth through some canyons. That's where the north and south facing slopes are, until it gets to the end, and then you'll head on back up. So it's basically one way in, one way out. And I'll be going through and talking about some of the plants and their adaptations as we go through here. But make sure that you come along with your clipboard and with the various handouts. Be sure to read the lab, of course, multiple times before you come out here. And it's also going to give you a bunch of really good background information. Let me also say that we've got some specific helps for you guys in terms of identifying things besides this little film. So for example, if I can pull this out, we've got the dichotomous key. And so there's a bunch of different plants that you can identify using this dichotomous key, which I know you've done in other classes, like the prickly pear and coast barrel cactus, the black sage, the sage, California sagebrush, chaparral broom, also known as broom baccharis, lemonade berry, toyon, California buckwheat, laurel sumac, dudleya, and bladderpot. So it doesn't have all of them, but it has some of the main ones. The other thing is that they're not great, but there's little sketches on the backside. So if you flip it over, there's some sketches of those, those most common native plants. The other thing that you should do, not for identification, but for more information, after you have gone out here and looked at the plants, is look at the description in this handout. It's called Bayside Trail Plants. Or look at it as you go along, because it'll give you a lot of insight into the different adaptations of each plant, as well as the history, how the Spaniards used it, or how the Native Americans used it, and so forth. Okay, I was going to show you the plant guide. There's an awesome native plant guide for San Diego by James Leitner, and I was going to hold it up. But basically I was just going to say don't bother with it, because it'll take you about an hour to find anything in there. It's got all these photos, but actually finding them isn't going to help. So just focus on the main ones that we're going to be talking about today. You should be able to identify 95% of the plants by just referencing those major native plants that we'll be talking about. If you come across something else you can't identify, make sure you take a picture, okay? The other thing to tell you about is that if you have your phone, and I'm sure you'll all have your phone for taking photos of these different plants, if you go into your phone and you upload, there's an app called, it's called PlantNet. So there it is, PlantNet. I don't know if we can get that. And if you go into PlantNet, you can then use that to take a photo and then use it for identifying those plants later on. So I'm just going to reference that. Be sure to check that out. It's a free download, PlantNet. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to head down here and we're going to take a look at some of the plants as we go along. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different plants. Okay, let's go. The trail closes at 4 p.m. There's a few signs like this, and that means that they want you to be heading out at 4 p.m. So don't come too late. Remember, Cabrillo National Monument, I think, closes at 5. So give yourself time, don't come too late. The other thing is, they say that there's rattlesnakes, and I'm sure there are, off the trail. That's one reason to stay on the trail, but the other reason is they really don't want you off the trail because of erosion and disturbance, so please stay on the trail to do this activity. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to show you one of the first plants we come across here. It's really cool. If you take a close look at that, at these leaves. They're kind of long and skinny, and they're really wrinkled, and they're really distinctive because of that. If you can pull off a leaf, it's not going to hurt anything, and just crush it in your hands, you get this really strong sage smell. And guess what? This is a sage. It's in the mint family. It's called black sage. Let's see. I'll explain why it's called black sage in a second. The other thing about this is that you should be able to identify this from the smell and from the kind of the shape of the leaves. But if that doesn't work, there is a sign here. Isn't that amazing? There's a sign that says that this is a black sage, Salvia mellifera. Now, you're not going to have a sign on all the plants, so that's not going to be something you can count on. But yeah, so this is black sage. As you can see, the leaves are small, and that's one adaptation against desiccation. So in the hot, dry Mediterranean climate, a lot of these plants have very small leaves that basically minimize evaporative water loss, so that they're able to maintain their water, and they maintain their functioning even when it's hot and dry. Okay, so let me tell you why it's called black sage, though. Go back. Okay, I can't go off the trail, but if you can look at over here, these dark whorls. Those are actually flower whorls that are all dried up. So they're kind of, I believe that they're sort of a pinkish color or bluish pinkish color, I forget what, when they are new, but you almost never see them new. Usually you see the flowers when they're all dried up, and they're in a bunch of whorls, like maybe 2 or 3 whorls sitting on top of the plant. So if it smells like sage, it's got wrinkled leaves, and it's got those black whorls, it's black sage. And by the way, that's the only kind of sage on this trail, so it's really simple. You don't have to confuse it with the half-dozen other sage plants. So this is black sage. Okay, so right next to the black sage we were just talking about, there's this patch of this really soft, fluffy kind of plant. And it's got really skinny, kind of filament-like, needle-like green leaves. These are actually leaves. So it's photosynthesizing in those leaves, but they're super skinny. And that's one of the adaptations these plants have, is that some of the plants have really, really tiny leaves to minimize evaporative water loss in a hot, dry climate. Now, if you actually crush this in your finger and you smell it, it also smells like sage, like the black sage we were just looking at. Not quite as strong, but still it's got that sage-like smell. And so this is called sagebrush. It's not a member of the mint family like the true sages, but it's actually a member of the sunflower family. It's a diagnostic or an indicator species. You'll always find California sagebrush in any coastal sage scrub habitat, so it's an indicator species. The other thing that's interesting is that strong smell that you get from either the black sage when you crush it or the sagebrush when you crush it, that really strong aromatic smell, is because it has chemicals in it that basically are helping it to compete against other plants. Because this stuff is strong, and when these leaves drop and get into the ground, it creates a kind of a chemical defense that keeps other plants from coming in. So it's an anti-competitor thing. It's called an allelochemical. So it's basically preventing other plants from getting too close and competing with it. So that's pretty cool. Allelopathy. Okay, let's go. Okay, so let's look at a bigger plant. We've looked at black sage, we've looked at California sagebrush, we've looked at California encylea. They're all kind of low-lying small plants with little leaves. Now this is a bush. In fact, you'd really have to say this is either a large bush or a small tree. And this is the famous lemonade berry, which you guys probably have heard of. And there's a couple things I want you to notice. First of all, it's quite big. And secondly, if you kind of zoom in on these leaves, actually touch these leaves, this one came off, they're oval, sometimes they have teeth, sometimes they don't, but they have a very stiff feeling to them because they are waxy. So that waxiness is an adaptation again, against for minimizing evaporative water loss. So these leaves are not going to lose very much water because they have that waxy coating. And it's a thick waxy leaf. Okay, and you can see it's up to an inch long. So it's not a tiny leaf, but it's a waxy and a thick leaf. Now, what's this stuff here? I'll show you different stages. This is actually remains of the flowers, and if we'll see if we can find another example. Oh, right here. Right here, you can see there's a flower right there. So what's happened is that this bush has flowered. Okay, the flowers die, and you get this kind of scrubby stuff. And hopefully we'll have some fruits later on the trail that I can show you. And the fruit is it's like a little sour apple, if you will, that has this sour kind of coating to it. And this is what they make lemonade out of. Very, very bitter lemonade. You have to add a lot of sugar. So that's why it's called lemonade fruit. Okay, so I wanted to show you this. This is more of that black sage we were just talking about. But look, this one has just bloomed recently, and you can see here those what were black whorls on top of the sage, the black sage further up the trail where it's hotter, actually still has some flowers, and you can see that these whorls of flowers are green. And so if you come up close and you look, it's kind of a violet, bluish, whitish kind of flower here. So it does have flowers, but what happens is they dry very quickly, and then you get those black whorls. But this, again, you can tell because it's got this wrinkled surface to these skinny leaves. And again, if you crush it, it smells like sage. Okay, so you may be getting bored with black sage. Here's yet another specimen of black sage. But look right behind me, there's this really weird contorted bush. And what's really distinctive about this bush is it looks like it's got, these branches that are very tortuous. They're very angular. And it looks like there's not a whole lot of leaves. If you actually look carefully, you'll see that there are these very tiny leaves. And the leaves are kind of folded in half. And that folding in half helps to reduce the amount of the leaf that's exposed to the sun, again, to minimize evaporative water loss. And then if you come really close, you can see it's got these amazing little flowers that have this little yellow outer border and kind of a reddish, brownish, yellowish disc in the middle. And this is known as cliff spurge. Cliff spurge is, as you can imagine, is adapted to a pretty harsh environment. It's often found on the cliffs. That's why it's called cliff spurge. But it's really distinctive in that it seems to be all branch and very few photosynthesizing, if I can say that, photosynthesizing leaves and flowers. But it does leaf out when it has the right conditions. There we go. There's the name, cliff spurge. Okay, so again, don't expect to see the sign, but there might be a sign there. They've recently put up signs. Now, right next to the cliff spurge, I want you to notice something else. And here's another bush, a low-lying plant, that seems to have a lot of these, dead branches in it. But they're not dead, they're just drought deciduous. And now this one, you're going to have to come up close and look very closely, but they have very, very small leaves. I mean, even smaller than the cliff spurge, and pretty small, very pretty flowers, kind of yellow and orange flowers. This is known as deerweed, and deerweed we get it on campus as well. And this is supposedly the deer like it, but this is again a plant that has tiny little leaves as an adaptation, just like the cliff spurge. And so the cliff spurge, the deerweed, and the California sagebrush have really tiny leaves. I'm going to show you one more plant that has also a kind of a needle-like leaf as well. Okay, so now if you're taking Spanish right now and you need to practice your Spanish, we've got English, and then we've got the Spanish translation. Sorpresas primaverales. So these are spring surprises. And so what this little And there's a few of these little interpretive signs along the way, and this one is actually going to give you some pictures of a few plants. One of them we've just talked about a few times is the black sage, and you can see the flowers that we just saw. The other one is known as California encelia, or actually they're calling it bush sunflower, is an alternative common name. And there's also one that we haven't seen yet called warty stem lilac, but you're not going to see that here, I don't think. I think the other one that we're going to see is the California buckwheat, and I don't know if we're going to see these fresh flowers or not, but I'll show you the buckwheat in a second. But again, take a look at the interpretive signs as you go along here, because some of them have some good information. Okay, I promised I would show you another plant with really skinny leaves, and this is one of them. There's one more that we're going to look at, and you can see, again, like the sagebrush, these leaves are like stems. They're like really skinny green stems that are photosynthesizing. It also has some kind of more standard leaves, but they're very small. This is known as broom baccharis, or also known as brittle bush, and that's because it's brittle. It'll break off pretty easily. This is, as you can imagine, this was used by the indigenous people here as well as the Spaniard in the early days. They actually used them as brooms, and you can imagine why. Some of the bigger ones that you'll see along this trail definitely could be used as brooms. They also used to chew on these if they had a toothache. I don't know how effective that was, but it was a natural medicinal remedy for toothache as well. So just about all these plants, by the way, they did something medicinal with them. Usually they would soak them, they would boil the leaves or something like that to make a tea for various maladies. So a lot of these native plants have a long history of being used for medicinal purposes as well. So here we have lemonade berry, and we're going to come across a lot of lemonade berry, especially in the cooler, more shaded areas of the trail. But what I want you to notice, I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can see, is that this particular one is at an earlier stage in which the flowers are still intact. There's lots of flowers. There are these gorgeous kind of light pinky white flowers that are throughout here. Up here and up here and up here and up here. And for the most part, they've retained the flowers. They haven't dropped them yet the way they have up further in the sunnier areas of the trail, where they're now, they kind of look a bit ragged. But right here, they look really nice. So that's what the flowers look like for the lemonade berry plant. Okay, so here we have another, it's either a really large bush or it's a small tree. And it's not the lemonade berry. It's really pretty big, and I think there's a bird behind there as well, so it actually provides shelter and nests for birds. But if you come closer, you see that these leaves don't look like lemonade berry at all. They're much longer. You would call them lance-like, so they are much longer and more skinny. And also they have teeth, so they kind of have this jagged teeth on the edge. Now we're going to hopefully find another one that has some berries on it. This is got various names. The name that is most common is toyon, but it's also known as Christmas berry or Hollywood berry. It's thought that this is actually one of the native plants that's along that slope in Hollywood. You know where that big Hollywood sign is? They think that that's actually where they got the name for Hollywood, was that the native undisturbed chaparral and coastal sage scrub habitat there had lots of this toyon or Hollywood berry, and so initially they called it Hollywood land, and then after a while they just shortened it to Hollywood. But what you can see is, again, like just like the lemonade berry, these leaves are waxy, they're thick, and even though they're fairly big compared with a lot of these other leaves, they're really tough, and so they tend to resist evaporative water loss. ¿Qué nos dicen los aromas? So what this is showing us a couple plants that have a strong aroma. We've already looked at the California sagebrush. the indicator species for the coastal sage scrub. And there's another one that is highlighted here in this interpretive sign called the bladder pod. And I want to show you the bladder pod right now. Okay, so here is the bladder pod in question, and you can see it's another plant that has little tiny leaves. If you look carefully, they're kind of like tacos. They're kind of folded over. They're very long and thin, like little needles. And they've got these pretty nice yellow flowers. The bees definitely like them. You see there's bees flying all around here. Also the hummingbirds like them quite a bit as well, and the harlequin beetles. Oh, there's a hummingbird. That's an Adam's hummingbird right there. Isn't that beautiful? Right on cue. Oh my goodness. Okay, and one other thing I want to show you is that it's called bladder pod because it's got these seed pods. Let's see if I can find it. It doesn't have big ones right now, but this is one of them. And this is where the seeds are. And they are interesting for a couple of reasons. One, they kind of look like little punching bags. But also, if you crush it and you smell it with your nose, or actually any of these leaves, one thing that you'll notice is that they stink. They're really stinky. They're not very nice. So unlike the sagebrush and the black sage and so forth, this bladder pod is kind of smelly. It's got kind of a bad smell. Okay, so I want to show you the buckwheat. This is known as California buckwheat. Of course, everything's got California hitched onto the name. Otherwise known as flat top buckwheat. And if we have a better example, I'll show it to you later on. But what I want you to notice about this buckwheat is that the leaves are like needles. They're super small. You can see they come in little bunches, and each leaf is just tiny, tiny, tiny. So again, another adaptation to avoid or to minimize the water loss, evaporative water loss. You can see that there's also a lot of dead stuff on top of the leaves. And usually this is a little bit more distinctive, but basically these are all, dried out flowers. And so hopefully we'll have a better example. But this is, if you see something with really short needle-like leaves, and it's got kind of this, dead flowers sticking up out of the top, that's the flat top or the California buckwheat. Okay, so here's another one of these great interpretive signs, and actually it's right by a little bench. If you get exhausted from the half mile of hiking that we've done so far, you can rest here. And there's also an aerial photo, and the sign says, "You are here, usted está aquí," and that's where you are. Also notice that it also highlights the cliff spurge, a close-up of the cliff spurge. And this picture is kind of cool because it has the seed pod, which looks like little apples. And you can see how the leaves look like kind of heart-shaped. That's kind of cool too. Just past that other interpretive sign, we've got this one, and it's basically talking about restoration efforts here. And guess what? There's a beautiful picture of California buckwheat in full bloom. So if you are lucky enough, I don't think we're going to see any today that have so much of a profusion of flowers, but this is what the flowers look like before they dry up. They're kind of whitish. So very pretty. That's the one that with a little tiny needle-like leaves. Now, if you come down here, couple things to notice. One is don't fall over the cliff. It's pretty much a straight drop here, but you can see this is a canyon, and this is the first canyon you're going to encounter on this trail, and this is where we have the north and the south facing slopes that you're going to be investigating. So the north facing slope is on the left, and it's the slope that right now is partially in the shade, and then the south facing slope has got all the open bare rock, and it's obviously hotter and drier over there as opposed to the north facing slope, which has more bushes and trees, and so you can see right away kind of a pretty amazing difference between north and southing slopes, north and south facing slopes in terms of the vegetation. Now the other thing to see is that there's a cool little artifact here, and this is where they used to keep the big old spotlights. During the Second World War, they had spotlights that they would roll out, and they would flash them down onto the bay in order to look for enemy submarines and so forth, trying to sneak in, because of course San Diego was a huge naval port, and it was an enemy target. Okay, so here we are, north-facing slope of the first canyon, and we're looking down where they've done a little bit of water diversion. And I want you to notice something. I was just horrified to see this. See those big yellow flowers right at the base of here? That's garland chrysanthemum, which is a horrible invasive plant. So hopefully the park ranger will come along and cut that down and nuke that invasive species out of existence. But that's we actually used to get this all the time right off campus. So that's not California Encelia, because notice it has a yellow disc and big flowers. That is garland chrysanthemum, a horrible invasive species. You can see that we're in the shade here. This is the north-facing slope of the first canyon, and we've got this really bright orange, appears to be a flower. It actually is not a flower. This is called paintbrush, Indian paintbrush, and it's called that because it looks like someone dipped this plant into a pot of paint. And you'll see a few of these as you come along the north-facing slopes. This is an interesting plant, mainly because it's a parasite. It's a partial parasite. So it is able to photosynthesize and to produce its own energy and its own food, but it also taps into the root systems of other plants and steals their nutrients and their food. The other thing to notice is that the orange part, you might think, oh, that's the flower. No, that's not the flower, that's the bract of this plant. It's not the flower at all. The flowers are actually really tiny. This is just a part of it's kind of like a part that surrounds the leaves. So it's not even the flower itself, but it looks very pretty. That's Indian paintbrush. So this is, all these interpretive signs are actually new since I was last here. Last time we were here was, just before the lockdown in 2020. And so this is all new. And guess what? This sign is talking about exactly what you're going to be investigating here, which is north-facing slopes over here and south-facing slopes over here. And the idea what they're trying to highlight here is that some plants like it hot and dry and xeric, which is what the south-facing slopes have, and some like it cool and moist, which is what the mesic north-facing slopes like. So if you want to find out more about the experiment or the research you're going to be doing, just read this. So now we're now in the sun. You can see we're in the south-facing slope of that first canyon, and this is a nice specimen of Dudleya. It's known as ladyfingers, because it looks like fingers. And this is a succulent, kind of like a cactus. Hopefully we'll see the other brand of Dudleya as well. But you can see it's basically a succulent. It's storing water inside its body here, and that's how it maintains its life support system in a hot, dry climate. So this is called Dudleya, or ladyfinger Dudleya. And right over here we have a cactus. Of course, another. This is a cholla cactus. You can see it's got really fierce spines on it. But of course, the cholla cactus, the prickly pear cactus, the barrel cactus, they're all succulents. Again, they store their water inside the body in a really impermeable kind of outer layer, which is photosynthetic, but very, very slow photosynthesis. So it grows very slowly, as do all cactuses, but partly the reason for that is it loses very little water. So again, this is a cholla. Okay, so again, south-facing slope, and you can see we've got cliff spurge. It's basically embedded. It's growing into this cliff. It really is living up to its name. Those tortuous branches with the teeny tiny leaves, and I don't see a whole lot of flowers. And then right below here, we've got more of the California buckwheat or flat-top buckwheat. And again, you can see that it has little tiny needle-like leaves, but it also has the dried up flowers on top. Here's some right here. Here's some right here. And that's where you get that flat top buckwheat name, because it looks like the dead flowers are kind of flat on top. Okay, so you can see we've got some more of this lovely black sage with these beautiful flowers, and in this example you've got some branches that have those nice creamy white flowers and the green whorls, and other branches that have the dried up black whorls that gives it the name of black sage. But what I want you to notice is just kind of growing out at the base of the black sage is this crazy plant. It's got all these compound leaves, very distinctive compound leaves. And at a certain time of the year, it also has these big pods, these like punching bag-like pods. This is called loco weed. Loco weed meaning crazy weed. And this is one of many plants actually that have that common name of loco weed that supposedly is not very good for livestock. So if horses or cows or livestock, other livestock eat this, it's supposed to be toxic and not good. Not sure if that's true or not, but this is the common name loco weed, and you'll see some of this along the trail as well. Okay, so we've got another specimen of lemonade berry, the ever popular lemonade berry. Again, these small, leathery, waxy leaves. But notice that we don't have flowers on this one. And what we actually have is the fruit. And the fruit is not quite ripe yet, but you can kind of see it's a little bit like candy corn in a sense. And if you pick it up and stick it in your mouth, doesn't taste like too much, but a little bit later it'll have this kind of sour exudate, kind of this coating, which is pretty sour, but it actually is like a lemon, and you can actually make lemonade out of it. But I would recommend putting a lot of sugar in to make it palatable. But yeah, not very good. But a little bit later, it actually is very refreshing when it's hot to get that kind of lemony sour taste. But again, this is the fruit for lemonade berry. Okay, so we have come to the second canyon, and it doesn't have the floodlight and the generator and all that historical stuff, but you can see it's definitely a canyon. In fact, it's right below the big old statue of Juan Cabrillo and the people and tourists that are looking out over the bay. But you can see, again, there's a north-facing slope here on the left and a south-facing slope on the right. And this is where you're going to do your second set of transects. You're going to do one transect on the north side, one transect on the right side, and you'll have two replicates. So you'll have two replicates of north-facing slope, two replicates of south-facing slope. And remember, you're going to do it on the outside of the trail, not the inside. The inside of the trail is kind of towards where there's a steep drop-off and not very much vegetation on that first canyon, okay? So on this lemonade berry bush, notice that there is a whole bunch of vines, and it so happens that these vines are putting out all these really gorgeous yellow flowers, kind of these starburst flowers. This is known as wild cucumber, and usually wild cucumber, when we see it, it's at a later stage and it's produced these seed pods, basically these green seed pods that have these little spikes on the end, and that's why they're called wild cucumber, because the seed pods look a little bit like cucumber, not very much. I don't see any seed pods right now, I don't see any cucumbers, but this vine, which is draped over the lemonade berry bush, is in fact wild cucumber. Now this is not a parasite like paintbrush. It actually is just using the lemonade berry bush as a platform so it can get at the light. So it's not sucking any of the nutrients out of the lemonade berry. It's not a parasite. Again, it's just taking advantage to spread over the tree and get at the light. Again, this is wild cucumber, and it's a vine. It's a native plant vine. Hey, I just wanted to highlight this interpretive sign. It doesn't really have to do with north and south facing slopes, but it does have to do with birds and spring migrants. And so I just wanted to point out that for you guys that are interested in birds after our great Famosa Slough bird watching trip, and you want to do that for your partner field project, these are some of the birds that you might be able to find. Hooded oriole. We've seen hooded orioles around. Wilson's warbler. This is Allen's hummingbird, so this is actually a migrant. We're not going to usually see that. Probably more likely to see the Allen's or the Anna's or the Costa's hummingbird. There's also a spotted towhee, which we have on campus, and a California towhee, which we have on campus, and some warblers and a thrasher. So anyway, these are some of the really cool birds that we can see on campus or nearby. And so think about if you want to do a field project on birds, this is a really good place to do it in. And if you go to different habitats around San Diego, you'll see different birds. So it's a good opportunity to get to know San Diego. So this interpretive sign here that's got the great horned owl, very cool bird by the way, which is found throughout San Diego, also talks about a bat called the Mexican long-tailed bat. And this bat actually pollinates a plant that's found along this trail. It's called Shaw's agave. And Shaw's agave is a really interesting plant in and of itself. And let me show you one of the best areas to see the Shaw's agave is right past that interpretive sign. If you just look down this slope, you'll see this stalk coming up and all those flowers, and then at the base kind of a rosette of these kind of spike-like leaves. The Shaw's agave itself is a succulent. It really is thought to be adapted to Pleistocene herbivores. I mean, like, you know, really big animals that would have ripped it apart had it not been so tough. But what I want you to notice is that it only flowers once in a generation, once in its life. It's called a semoparous organism. It only reproduces once in a lifetime. So basically what the Shaw's agave does is it grows, it stores energy, it gets bigger, and then at some point when the conditions are right, it puts up this stalk, the stalk that you can hopefully see down there, puts out all these flowers, the bats come and pollinate it, and then it reproduces, and you can see that all the the children of the parent plant are at the base of that plant. And so it's a really cool strategy. It's a kind of a boom or bust kind of reproductive strategy. The other thing that's interesting is that this is a plant that's used a lot by humans for alcoholic beverages. And so out of the agave, we get 3 different alcoholic beverages. One called pulque, which is basically a fermented drink, and then 2 distilled drinks, one of which you're familiar with, which is tequila, of course. So we get all these alcoholic beverages from the agave, which some people really appreciate. But even if you don't appreciate that, you can appreciate the fact that this is a very cool plant that reproduces really maybe only once in a decade or twice in a decade and then dies, but produces offspring. So check this one out. Again, it's pollinated by bats, so you would not normally see it pollinated, sometimes by insects. We're almost at the end of the Bayside Trail, and we have this big old bush of brewer's saltbush. Now, brewer's saltbush is really distinctive. It's got these leaves that are kind of gray. They're lighter colored on one side than the other, and that's because they have what's called trichomes, which are really fine hairs. And again, it's trichomes. These really fine hairs are an adaptation to reduce the amount of evaporative water loss. So, an adaptation to a dry, desiccating climate. This brewer's saltbush, Atriplex, is also a halophyte. So it's designed to be able to take in salt, and it's a salt excreter. It excretes the salt on its leaf, and that's how it's able to basically survive in a salty environment. So you'll see these guys in kind of like a salt marsh kind of environment as well. And in fact, if you pull out the leaf doesn't smell like anything, but if you lick it, yeah, it's kind of a little bit salty. It's, you know, it's not like a taco or something like that, but it's pretty good. Anyway, so this is the again, the salt bush, the brewer's salt bush. Okay, so we're at the end of the trail. As you can see, the end of the trail. Just beyond here is where the military reserve starts, so don't cross over that fence or they might shoot you. And then on this side, there's the last interpretive sign, which is a reproduction of what they think it might have looked like back when Juan Cabrillo and his ship and his crew showed up here. And they actually landed on Ballast Point, which is where they have the subs, the naval subs and so forth now. all those buildings over there in the distance. That's Ballast Point. But back then, of course, there weren't any buildings, and as you can see, this is where Cabrillo and his men landed before they headed up the coast of California. So one more thing, and that is if we go over here, right on the side of the trail, right by the end of the trail, we see a bunch more of that agave, that Shaw's agave that we looked at before, except we see it's close up. And we see it really is designed to prevent kind of prehistoric herbivores, big old Pleistocene herbivores, from eating it, because it's got big old spikes and spines on it. And you can also see the stalk where probably last year one of these plants reproduced and then died. And if you look down into the ocean, because we're closest to the ocean right here, you can see there's a bunch of kelp down there. You can see birds. You might see also some surfers or some fishermen. You might see some military ships. So all sorts of cool things. So that's the end of our trail. And basically what you want to do once you've come down to the end of here, and I hope you will take the entire hike down here, it doesn't take long, head back up, go to that first canyon, and you're going to do one transect of 150 feet. Remember what you're going to do with the feet? Yeah, it's just like put your feet in front of the other. So that's 1 foot. Okay, 1 meter to the side of the trail. Identify the 1 or 2 dominant species there. Foot number 2, what's that? Foot number 3, what's that? And you're just going to continue on 150 feet on the south side and then the north side. Then you'll go to that other canyon and you'll do a replicate of the south side, north side transect. So hopefully you can figure that out. And good luck and have fun. Okay, so let me show you how you're going to do your transects. We're here. This is actually the first canyon, and this is the south-facing slope. And you'll have a data sheet like this, and the first column is foot markers, so you can just put that 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 150. Or you can, if it's the same plant, you can put it like 1 to 5 is that one plant, and 5 to 20 is another plant. The species name goes in the second column, and then the third, fourth, and fifth column, that is for you to decide how you want to characterize those plants. Now, the way we do it is we're going to use our foot, like I said, as a marker. So for example, let's say we start right here. Here's my foot. I look over to the right, and the plant that I see is black sage. So marker number 1 is black sage. I go to the second part, and it's black sage, and it's also California sagebrush. That's what this stuff is. So we have black sage, California sagebrush for foot 2, foot 3, same thing, foot 4, same thing. Foot 5, we're getting some buckwheat, some California buckwheat. So we've got California buckwheat, we've got some black sage, and foot, whatever that was, 5. And same thing, we keep doing this, we keep doing this. Over here, what do we have here? We've got some Encilia. So we've got Encilia and buckwheat for this foot, and now we just have probably just Encilia, and so forth and so forth. Go over here, this is all sagebrush, all these foots. So you're basically going to characterize what plants you're seeing at each of those footsteps, going about a meter, about 3 feet in from the side of the trail. And remember, you're doing it on the outside of the trail, you're not doing it on the inside of the trail, so just one side of the trail. Okay, so we've just done 150 feet transect measure on the south side. As we go to the north side, you can see it's nice and shady and cool and lovely here. And so we'll start again using the same data sheet, using the same procedure. And so for example here, if this was my first foot, I would look over 3 feet, a meter over on this side, and I would say, oh, this is black sage. Yeah, this is black sage. So this is black sage, black sage, black sage, black sage, black sage, and actually it's black sage all the way until we get over to here, and then we get some black sage and some buckwheat, black sage and buckwheat, black sage and buckwheat, black sage and buckwheat. There's some grass here, I don't know what that is. You can just put, unknown grass, and so forth. And so we're just going to do that again, another 150 feet, and then you have your first 2 replicates, your second 2 replicates you'll do in the second canyon, just like that.